Hi everyone, in this video we are going to discuss how when we eat any carbohydrate, how the glucose that is formed by digestion, how it is used up by our body to produce energy, how we utilize the glucose to produce energy in our body. Obviously you know that energy is produced from glucose by the process called respiration. But there are two types of respiration. One is called aerobic respiration, which is in presence of air, the usual breathing, right? When we breathe the oxygen, it diffused into the blood and goes to the cell, and cell use this oxygen to burn glucose. So it's called aerobic respiration. There is another one which is called anaerobic. It is the when there's a deficiency in glucose, our body in oxygen, our body breaks down glucose into this is broken down to produce energy, but less amount of energy, and also lactic acid is produced. Anyway, in here we are going to discuss how glucose is broken down. So the process of breaking down glucose is called glycolysis. Where does it happen? It happens in mitochondria. But how? Now here's the thing. When glucose in the mitochondria at first is converted into 1,6 biphosphate. So glucose gains a phosphate, so become 1,6 biphosphate, right? Now, and this is called phosphorylation. Now when it becomes 1,6 biphosphate, then it is broken down into 2 triose phosphate. Triose means 3, so it was a 6 carbon molecule. You know that glucose is a 6 carbon molecule, right? So when it is produced, when it is converted into 1,6 biphosphate, there's just a phosphate in the glucose, and it's broken down into 2 triose phosphate. This triose phosphate then produces 2 molecules of pyruvate. Now in this process, when they produce the pyruvate, the triose phosphate loses their phosphate, and these phosphate are utilized to make ATP from ADP. ATP from this is the ADP. Okay, so this is the ADP. Then from ADP it becomes ATP, right? Okay, now there you go. Whenever you are producing in our last class I told you that substrate level phosphorylation, right? And this is the substrate level phosphorylation, where the substrate through triose phosphate loses their phosphate to the ADP, and ADP becomes ATP, and this ATP is used as a source of currency, the energy currency, right? ATP to produce the ATP. So there you go, you have ATP now. Now that's not the end. You have other process. When it becomes 2 molecule of pyruvate, here we are, pyruvate. This pyruvate, then it goes in 2 ways. One, if you have oxygen. Another one is if you don't have oxygen. Aerobic, anaerobic. We are going to learn here only the aerobic. So when you have presence of oxygen, it goes into this pyruvate goes into the mitochondrial matrix. It goes into the mitochondrial matrix. When it goes to the mitochondrial matrix, it is involved in a reaction called the link reaction. What happens in the link reaction? Here the pyruvate undergoes oxidative phosphorylation. That means oxygen helps the pyruvate to get a phosphate. Okay, so while this happens, you get NADH in this reaction. Remember, in the previous reaction also we have also get 2 NADH. I will talk about it later why NADH is important. But here, when the pyruvate it undergoes oxidative phosphorylation, it becomes acetyl. It produces acetyl group. See, pyruvate becomes acetyl group. What is acetyl group? You know, from AS chemistry we know that acetyl means 2 carbon, right? Acetic acid. Remember the acetic acid is like acidic group. So this acetyl group has 2 carbon. From pyruvate you have got acetyl group. Now from this acetyl group there is an enzyme called the coenzyme A. This coenzyme A reacts with the acetyl group and it releases carbon dioxide. Now this is the interesting thing. This is where actually carbon dioxide is produced, in the respiration, right? So this coenzyme A reacts with acetyl group and makes acetyl-CoA. So you have now acetyl-CoA. This acetyl-CoA then goes to another cycle called Krebs cycle. This is not the Kreb, C-R-A-B, it's Kreb. It's the scientist's name, Krebs cycle. So what does it do? Here is the acetyl-CoA, right? How many carbon it has? 2 carbon. 2 carbon. What does it do? It first reacts with a 4 carbon molecule. This is the first reaction, and produces 6 carbon compound, which is called 6 carbon citrate. This 6 carbon citrate then releases carbon dioxide. Now here you go, here another place where we got actually CO2 in the respiration, and also the NAD becomes NADH2, and this 6 carbon becomes 5 carbon because it has released 1 carbon through carbon dioxide. Now you have 5 carbon molecule, right? This 5 carbon molecule then become 4 carbon molecule again. When it becomes 4 carbon molecule, why it becomes 1 carbon? Where does it go? The 1 carbon comes from this CO2. This CO2 has gone from this 5 carbon molecule. That's why it becomes 4 carbon molecule. What happens else? Here, very important, here also the phosphorus group, the phosphate group, it releases the phosphate group and ADP becomes ATP here. You see, you get another ATP. So we have ATP in 2 places, in glycolysis and another one in Krebs cycle. Another one is in Krebs cycle. And you have also FAD becomes FADH2 in this process, and also NAD becomes NADH2. All this thing through this process, this 5 carbon molecule become a 4 carbon molecule, and this 4 carbon molecule again react with the acetyl-CoA. So there's a cycle going on here, and that's why it's called Krebs cycle. And remember, this cycle goes on 2 times for every molecule of glucose. Whenever we have a glucose, it undergoes 2 Krebs cycle. Okay, I hope let's do an overview of it. Very simple overview. Glucose becomes 1,6-biphosphate. 1,6-biphosphate becomes 2-triose-phosphate. 2-triose-phosphate releases ATP and become 2-pyruvate. Now in presence of oxygen, the 2-pyruvate becomes pyruvate, go to the mitochondrial matrix and do the link reaction. Here pyruvate undergoes oxidative phosphorylation, decarboxylation, sorry. I think in previously I mistakenly said that oxidative phosphorylation. That's not true. Oxidative decarboxylation. oxidative decarboxylation in the presence of oxygen. So this pyruvate becomes acetyl group. Now why is it called oxidative decarboxylation? Because pyruvate releases carbon, okay, and becomes acetyl group. This acetyl group then reacts with coenzyme A and becomes acetyl CoA, and then this acetyl CoA goes into Krebs cycle. In the Krebs cycle, acetyl CoA reacts with 4 carbon molecule to become 6 carbon molecule called 6C citrate. This 6C citrate becomes then releases carbon dioxide, become 5 carbon. This 5 carbon then releases ATP, releases carbon dioxide, releases FeDH2, releases NADH2 and become 4 carbon. This 4 carbon again reacts with acetyl CoA. This goes on 2 times for each of the glucose molecule. I think it's now clear to you. Hope you understand.